If you ever think a single punch cannot rewrite an academy's history, then you have never met a human from a death world. My name is Instructor Sailor Van, and for 18 standard cycles I believed I had seen every mistake a young cadet could make. I watched ambitious recruits challenge veterans they could never defeat. I watched overconfident champions fall because they underestimated physics, exhaustion, or simple bad judgment. But nothing prepared me for the morning Caleb Hayes walked into Combat Hall 9. He did not look extraordinary. In fact, if you placed him beside almost any first-year cadet, most people would have overlooked him entirely. He stood just over 6 feet tall, wore the Academy's gray training uniform without a single decoration, and carried himself with the relaxed posture of someone arriving for an ordinary class instead of the most anticipated combat evaluation of the semester. The official roster identified him as human. Homeworld, Earth. Classification, Deathworld 9. Every alien cadet around me quietly laughed at that final line. We all knew the stories. Humans supposedly evolved on a world that wanted to eliminate them every single day. Gravity stronger than most civilized planets. Weather that could turn deadly without warning. Predators that hunted almost everything. Most of us assumed those stories had been exaggerated over centuries of retelling. After all, the quiet man standing in front of us hardly looked like the nightmare those reports described. Across the arena stood Vorik Thane, the Academy's undefeated senior combat champion. Taller by nearly 2 feet, broader than 2 humans standing shoulder to shoulder, decorated with medals from interstellar youth tournaments. Vorik represented everything our Academy admired. Confidence, discipline, dominance. The viewing gallery overflowed with cadets from every department. More than 400 students filled the seats while thousands more connected through the Academy's internal broadcast network. Everyone expected to watch a lesson. Nobody expected to witness history. Before I could even begin my opening remarks, Vorik slowly stepped away from his assigned position and walked directly toward Caleb. The arena became strangely quiet. Even the automated drones hovering overhead adjusted their cameras. Every instinct told me something unusual was about to happen. Vorik stopped only a foot away from the human and studied him with obvious disbelief. "So you're the famous Deathworlder," he said with a grin that spread through the audience faster than wildfire. Laughter echoed through the hall. Caleb simply looked back with calm blue eyes and offered a polite nod. No challenge, no threat, no attempt to impress anyone. That only encouraged the crowd even more. Then, without another word, Vorik raised one hand and delivered a single quick training punch directly into Caleb's upper chest. Gasps swept through the arena. It was not a brutal strike. Academy rules prohibited serious force before official authorization. But it was unmistakably public humiliation. Every student knew exactly what it meant. The strongest cadet had announced, in front of the entire Academy, that the human did not deserve respect. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward Caleb Hayes, waiting for him to stumble backward, lose his balance, or show even the smallest sign that the champion's message had landed. Instead, the human remained exactly where he was, quietly brushing a speck of dust from his Academy jacket before lifting his eyes toward me with an expression so calm it unsettled me far more than anger ever could. No one spoke for several long seconds, and in a combat academy that silence carried more weight than any alarm. I had spent nearly 2 decades teaching cadets from more than 40 intelligent species, and every one of them reacted the same way after being publicly challenged. Some became angry. Some tried to defend their pride with loud words. Others immediately demanded another match. Caleb Hayes did none of those things. He simply looked at me with the expression of someone waiting for instructions that everyone else assumed had already been given. Around us, whispers spread through the arena faster than the Academy network could process them. Some students laughed because they believed the human had frozen in fear. Others argued that he had not even understood the insult. A few quietly checked the official Earth database on their wrist displays, searching for something that explained why a supposedly fragile species could remain so calm after such an embarrassing moment. The answers they found only created more confusion. Earth possessed higher gravity than almost every populated world represented in our Academy. Its atmosphere contained oxygen levels that many species considered dangerously reactive. The planet supported predators, violent storms, freezing climates, burning deserts, deep oceans, and countless environmental hazards that most civilizations eliminated before building their first cities. The more the cadets read, the less they understood the quiet man standing only a few feet away. If those reports were true, why did Caleb look so ordinary? Why was he standing with relaxed shoulders instead of preparing for another exchange? Why was his breathing perfectly steady while hundreds of students stared at him? Even Vorik frowned for the first time that morning. The champion had expected an emotional reaction. Instead, the human behaved as though nothing unusual had happened. The academy scanners floating above the arena continued collecting biometric data from every participant. I glanced toward the nearest display panel, expecting to see elevated stress levels from the human cadet. Instead, Caleb's heartbeat remained almost unchanged. His breathing pattern was remarkably consistent. Muscle tension barely increased. The medical system even highlighted his condition in green, indicating complete physical composure. That result unsettled me far more than any dramatic display ever could. Across the audience, conversations shifted from amusement to curiosity. A second-year cadet from the Talaran Republic quietly pointed toward the biometric board, and within moments dozens of students noticed the same impossible reading. Someone muttered that the equipment had malfunctioned. Another insisted the Earth database must have been inaccurate, but every independent scanner reported identical results. Caleb Hayes was standing in the center of a packed combat arena with the Academy champion directly in front of him, and according to every certified instrument available, his body showed almost no signs of pressure at all. I stepped forward, determined to restore order before rumors replaced discipline. Academy regulations required me to address unauthorized contact immediately. I looked first at Vorik, then at Caleb, allowing both cadets the opportunity to speak. Vorik folded his arms with complete confidence, clearly convinced the matter had already ended in his favor. Caleb quietly adjusted the sleeve of his training uniform before meeting my eyes again. There was no anger in his face, no fear, and no desire to impress anyone. Only quiet patience. Then he asked a single question in a calm, respectful voice that echoed across the suddenly silent arena. "Instructor, was that considered the official beginning of today's combat evaluation?" The question caught every listener completely off guard because nobody expected the human to care about procedure after being challenged in front of the entire academy. I looked directly at Caleb Hayes, searching for sarcasm, hidden anger, or wounded pride, but found none. His voice had been steady, respectful, and surprisingly ordinary. Before I could answer, the Academy's central artificial intelligence interrupted through the overhead speakers with its familiar neutral tone. Combat Hall 9 Regulation Review. Any physical contact occurring before an instructor declares the beginning of evaluation is classified as unauthorized conduct. Any physical contact occurring after authorization becomes part of official assessment. A quiet ripple spread across the audience. Hundreds of students suddenly realized the timing mattered more than the challenge itself. Vorik Thane slowly turned toward me, his confidence still obvious, but now mixed with curiosity. Even he wanted to know how I would interpret the situation. I understood exactly what everyone was thinking. If I declared that the evaluation had already begun, then Caleb had every right to respond under Academy rules. If I ruled that the match had not officially started, then Vorik had violated Academy conduct before the first lesson even began. Neither outcome favored the Academy champion. The responsibility rested entirely with me. I took one slow breath before activating my instructor badge. The arena lights shifted from white to deep blue, signaling that the official evaluation sequence had not yet been initiated. A notification immediately appeared on every display throughout the Academy. Unauthorized contact recorded. Student disciplinary review pending. Murmurs echoed across the massive room. Some cadets looked disappointed because they expected immediate punishment. Others quietly smiled, believing the human had avoided an impossible fight through technicality alone. They still misunderstood him. Caleb nodded politely after reading the notification. "Thank you for the clarification, instructor," he said without changing his calm expression. Then he surprised everyone again. "In that case, I would like to wait until the official evaluation begins." The entire audience stared in disbelief. He was not asking to leave. He was not filing a complaint. He was not demanding an apology. He was simply asking to follow the rules exactly as written. Even I needed a second to process what I had just heard. For 18 standard cycles, I had watched ambitious cadets search for every possible advantage before entering the arena. Caleb Hayes appeared interested in only one thing: fairness. That simple request changed the atmosphere more than any dramatic speech could have. Vorik's confident smile became noticeably smaller. He had expected emotion. Instead, he faced someone who refused to let pride control the situation. The Academy Artificial Intelligence completed its review and projected the evaluation countdown above the arena floor. 60 seconds until official activation. The audience settled into complete silence. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody whispered. Hundreds of cadets watched the humans standing perfectly still beneath the glowing countdown, as though they were seeing Earth for the very first time. Then Caleb quietly rolled his shoulders once, adjusted the cuff of his training sleeve, and looked toward Vorik with the same polite expression he had worn since entering the hall. "I am ready whenever the class officially begins," he said, and for reasons I could not explain, those simple words made the undefeated champion shift his footing for the first time that morning. The final seconds before activation always felt longer than they really were, but that morning every heartbeat inside Combat Hall 9 seemed loud enough to hear across the entire arena. The glowing countdown above the training floor dropped from 10 to 9, then 8, while every spectator leaned forward in complete silence. Even the broadcast drones stopped drifting through the air and locked themselves into perfect observation positions. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. I glanced once more at Caleb Hayes and searched for the smallest sign of nervous anticipation. His breathing remained slow. His hands rested naturally at his sides. His eyes stayed focused on Vorik Thane without hostility or arrogance. It was the expression of someone studying a problem instead of an opponent. That alone unsettled me. Every experienced fighter understood the emotional weight of facing an undefeated champion. Every experienced fighter except, apparently, the human from Earth. Across the arena, Vorik rolled his shoulders and stretched each arm with practiced confidence. The champion had earned his reputation through hundreds of victories under Academy supervision. He possessed remarkable speed, excellent discipline, and years of technical training against dozens of different species. The audience trusted him because they had watched him solve every challenge placed before him. Several instructors standing beside me quietly predicted that the official evaluation would last less than 1 minute. One even suggested activating the medical response team immediately to avoid unnecessary delays after the match concluded. Nobody questioned whether Caleb could compete. The only debate centered on how quickly the lesson would end. The countdown reached 5. A low mechanical tone echoed through the hall as the arena shields powered to full capacity. Digital boundary markers appeared across the polished training floor. Environmental systems confirmed standard gravity, stable atmospheric pressure, and unrestricted movement for both participants. Every safety requirement had been satisfied. 4, 3, 2. I noticed something unexpected. Vorik looked completely prepared for combat, yet his attention kept drifting toward Caleb's face instead of his posture. He wanted to understand why the human refused to display fear. Confidence built from victory was familiar. Confidence without visible effort was not. 1. A bright tone rang throughout the academy. Blue lights surrounding the arena instantly shifted to white. The Academy Artificial Intelligence announced the beginning of the official combat evaluation. Before I could issue my opening instructions, Caleb respectfully raised one hand. The gesture was so calm that several students looked confused. I gave a short nod, allowing him to speak. The human turned toward Vorik instead of addressing me. His voice remained polite enough that every word carried clearly through the silent arena. "Now that class has officially begun," he said, "would you like me to respond as a student or as someone representing Earth?" At first, nobody reacted. The sentence sounded almost ordinary. Then the meaning settled over the audience like a cold wind. Representing Earth. Not himself. His planet. Around the viewing gallery, quiet conversations disappeared completely. Even instructors exchanged uncertain glances. Vorik answered with a confident smile that seemed just a little less certain than before. "Show me whatever you think makes no difference," he replied. Caleb nodded once in appreciation, almost as though he had received permission rather than a challenge. Then he calmly stepped forward exactly one pace onto the center mark of the arena, planted both feet with effortless balance, and waited without making a single aggressive movement. For the first time that morning, the undefeated champion was the first one to break eye contact. Caleb remained on the center marker without raising his guard, and that simple decision confused everyone watching more than any dramatic display ever could. The academy taught every cadet to establish distance, analyze posture, and prepare for movement before an evaluation officially unfolded. Caleb ignored every familiar pattern. He simply stood there with balanced footing and relaxed shoulders, almost as if he were waiting for a conversation instead of a contest. Vorik circled slowly, measuring angles with the confidence of someone who had repeated the same opening hundreds of times. Around the arena, instructors quietly exchanged observations while advanced students activated personal analysis programs to study the human stance. The results became stranger with every passing second. Caleb's posture refused to match any recognized combat system in the academy archives. His center of balance appeared unusually stable, yet his weight distribution looked almost effortless. One biomechanics specialist whispered that the human was making constant adjustments too subtle for most sensors to detect. Another insisted that he was simply standing naturally. The disagreement spread through the observation deck until even senior faculty began comparing notes. I remained silent because I had started noticing details that everyone else had overlooked. Caleb never focused on Vorik's hands alone. His eyes tracked the champion's shoulders, breathing, feet, and even the rhythm of each step across the polished floor. He was gathering information instead of rushing toward action. That level of patience was unusual in a first-year cadet. Vorik finally stopped circling and smiled with renewed confidence. "Still waiting?" he asked. Caleb answered with a small nod. "Still learning," he replied. A few students laughed, believing the response sounded uncertain. Others did not laugh at all. They had begun watching the human's eyes instead of listening to his words. Those eyes never wandered. They never rushed. They simply observed everything. The academy recording drones quietly zoomed closer as the atmosphere shifted from entertainment to careful study. Even the artificial intelligence suspended background announcements to prioritize tactical recording. Something about this exchange no longer resembled an ordinary evaluation. I realized the room had become divided into two groups. One still believed they were watching an undefeated champion teach a newcomer an unforgettable lesson. The other had started wondering whether the newcomer understood something the rest of us had missed. Then Caleb inhaled once, slowly and naturally, before speaking again. "On Earth," he said, "our instructors always reminded us that the first lesson is not how hard you can move. It is whether you know why you are moving at all." The words echoed through the arena, and for the first time that morning nobody tried to interrupt him. Even Vorik's confident expression softened into curiosity. The lesson had not truly begun with speed or strength. It had begun with a question that every cadet in the academy suddenly found themselves asking. The silence inside Combat Hall 9 became more revealing than any display of strength could have been. Caleb Hayes remained perfectly still, yet somehow he had become the center of every calculation in the room. The academy analysis systems continued collecting data from both participants, projecting thousands of tiny measurements across instructor displays that only faculty members could read. Every new update deepened the mystery. Caleb's breathing never accelerated. His balance remained almost perfectly centered. Even his eye movements followed a remarkably efficient pattern, scanning only the information that mattered while ignoring every distraction surrounding him. I had spent years teaching cadets that true control began long before movement. But until that moment, I had never witnessed someone demonstrate the principle so completely. Across the arena, Vorik Thane slowly relaxed his shoulders. His confidence had not disappeared, but it had changed into something more cautious. He was no longer facing a nervous first-year student. He was facing an opponent who refused to be pulled into the emotional rhythm everyone else expected. The audience sensed the difference immediately. Conversations that had once focused on Earth's reputation shifted toward Caleb himself. Some students quietly wondered whether every human trained this way. Others searched archived Earth records, only to discover that human combat traditions often emphasized patience, observation, and restraint before decisive action. Those discoveries spread through the viewing gallery faster than the Academy network could verify them. I activated the arena recorder's advanced observation mode. If this evaluation continued along its current path, it deserved preservation for future instruction, not because of overwhelming force, but because of the extraordinary discipline unfolding in front of us. Caleb finally took one measured step forward. It was neither fast nor dramatic. In fact, several students almost missed it entirely. Yet every tactical sensor immediately recalculated the engagement geometry. Distance, timing, and positioning all shifted at once. The Academy Artificial Intelligence highlighted the adjustment with a soft notification that surprised even experienced instructors. Optimal center line established. I had never seen the system announce that automatically for a first-year cadet. Vorik noticed it as well. His expression remained composed, but his next movement became noticeably more deliberate. For the first time during the evaluation, the undefeated champion adjusted his own position in response to someone else's placement rather than following his original plan. That single detail changed the atmosphere throughout Combat Hall 9. Victory was no longer the only question being asked. The greater question had become far more interesting. Just how much had everyone misunderstood about the quiet human from Earth before he ever stepped into the academy? The next 30 seconds transformed Combat Hall 9 into the quietest room in the entire academy. Nobody seemed interested in speaking anymore because everyone had become fascinated by the same question. What exactly was Caleb Hayes waiting for? The human had not attempted to impress anyone with impossible claims or dramatic gestures. He simply remained composed while allowing every observer to draw their own conclusions. That restraint proved far more unsettling than confidence ever could have been. Vorik Thane slowly adjusted his stance once again, and this time I noticed something I had never witnessed during any of his previous evaluations. He hesitated. The pause lasted less than a second, but every instructor recognized it immediately. It was the tiny delay that appeared whenever an experienced competitor realized the situation no longer matched the expectations formed before the contest began. Caleb noticed it as well, yet he did nothing to exploit the moment. Instead, he calmly said, "Take your time. Good decisions usually outlast fast ones." Several cadets exchanged confused looks. That sounded less like a challenge and more like advice. The Academy recording system automatically tagged the statement for instructional review, something normally reserved for faculty lectures rather than student conversations. I found myself wondering whether the human even realized what effect his words were having. Around the observation deck, analysts continued reviewing Earth's historical training philosophies. New information appeared across our faculty displays describing endurance exercises, decision-making under pressure, and the surprising importance humans placed on remaining calm before taking action. The pattern emerging from those records was remarkably consistent. Earth seemed to reward disciplined judgment just as much as physical ability. Suddenly, many details about Caleb began fitting together. His patience was not unusual for his people. It had been trained into him. The audience sensed the shift without reading a single report. Earlier, they had arrived expecting entertainment. Now they leaned forward because they believed they were watching a lesson unfold in real time. Even students from species that rarely agreed with one another stopped arguing and simply observed. The arena itself seemed different. The lights, the polished floor, and the hovering drones remained unchanged. Yet the atmosphere carried a quiet respect that had not existed when the morning began. I looked toward the Academy's tactical display and noticed another unexpected notification. The predictive outcome model had suspended its automatic forecast. That system had analyzed thousands of evaluations over the years, yet it now displayed a single line across the instructor console. Insufficient behavioral comparison data. In simple terms, the Academy admitted it could no longer predict what would happen next because it had never recorded anyone approaching a contest quite like this. Vorik lowered his shoulders and gave a slow nod, the confident grin from earlier replaced by genuine focus. Caleb returned the nod with the same calm courtesy he had shown since entering the hall. At that moment, I realized the greatest surprise of the day was not hidden strength or extraordinary technique. It was the discovery that one quiet human from Earth had changed the behavior of an entire academy before the real test had even begun. When the evaluation timer reached its midpoint, I expected someone to force the pace. Instead, something far more remarkable happened. Nobody wanted to interrupt the moment because the lesson unfolding before us had become larger than a single academy exercise. Caleb Hayes and Vorik Thane remained several feet apart, neither rushing forward, neither attempting to overwhelm the other with spectacle. To inexperienced students, the silence looked uneventful. To every instructor in Combat Hall 9, it was filled with information. The Academy's tactical sensors continued mapping posture, balance, breathing, and reaction speed. Normally, those measurements produced clear predictions within seconds. This time, the artificial intelligence displayed comparison after comparison without reaching a conclusion. Caleb's movements were consistently efficient, but almost impossible to classify. Every adjustment reduced unnecessary effort. Every shift in weight appeared natural rather than rehearsed. It was as though he had practiced until technique no longer looked like technique at all. The observation software highlighted one detail that immediately drew my attention. Throughout the entire evaluation, Caleb had never once placed himself in a position that required a hurried correction. Every step had quietly expanded his options while limiting those available to his opponent. I replayed the movement sequence from 3 different camera angles and reached the same conclusion each time. He was shaping the encounter long before anyone realized it. Around the arena, students stopped cheering for individuals and began studying the displays. Questions replaced predictions. A senior engineering cadet asked whether Earth's gravity forced humans to develop unusually stable movement. A medical student wondered if the human nervous system processed balance differently from most Academy species. Faculty members began recording those questions for future research because, for the first time in years, an introductory evaluation had become an interdisciplinary lesson. Vorik recognized the change as well. His confidence had not disappeared, but it had matured into respect. He no longer treated Caleb as an unfamiliar transfer student. He treated him as someone worth understanding. That subtle shift mattered more than any scoreboard could have measured. Caleb noticed it immediately and responded with a slight nod, acknowledging the respect without celebrating it. There was no triumph in his expression, only quiet professionalism. Watching that exchange, I realized the atmosphere inside Combat Hall 9 had transformed completely. Earlier that morning, the audience had gathered to see whether a human from Earth belonged in the Academy. Now they were asking a different question entirely. What could the Academy learn from Earth? The answer had already begun revealing itself. Discipline before emotion. Observation before action. Respect before pride. As the evaluation continued, the Academy recording archive automatically elevated the session from a routine training file to a permanent instructional reference. That promotion almost never happened on the first day of a new cadet's enrollment. Yet no instructor objected. Every one of us understood that we were witnessing something future classes would need to study, not because of dramatic displays, but because one quiet human had demonstrated that the strongest first impression was not built through intimidation. It was built through complete mastery of oneself. When the evaluation finally concluded, nobody rushed toward the exits. Hundreds of cadets remained exactly where they were, staring at the arena floor that had looked so ordinary only an hour earlier. Nothing about Combat Hall 9 had physically changed, yet the Academy itself somehow felt different. I deactivated the instructor console and looked across the silent audience. Usually, after a first-year evaluation, students argued about technique, speed, or scoring. This time they discussed something else entirely. They talked about patience. They talked about judgment. They talked about the strange confidence of a human who never needed to raise his voice to command the attention of an entire academy. Caleb Hayes quietly thanked the officials for their time before collecting his training jacket. There was no celebration, no dramatic speech, no attempt to enjoy the attention now following him through every corridor. As he walked toward the exit, cadets from species that had laughed at him only that morning stepped aside without being asked. Not because anyone ordered them to, because respect had replaced assumption. Vorik Thane watched the human leave before turning toward me. The undefeated champion no longer looked frustrated. Instead, he appeared thoughtful in a way I had never seen before. "Instructor," he said quietly, "I believed strength meant proving that you were greater than everyone else. Today I learned it can also mean never needing to prove it at all." I recorded those words immediately. They deserved a place in the Academy archives beside every tactical lesson we had ever preserved. During the following weeks, faculty members reviewed every second of the evaluation from dozens of camera angles. We searched for hidden technology, unusual biological advantages, or overlooked environmental factors that might explain what everyone had witnessed. We found none. The greatest lesson had never been hidden inside extraordinary ability. It had been visible from the very beginning. Calm decisions, emotional discipline, quiet confidence. Those qualities had reshaped an entire room before anyone realized the lesson had started. The academy curriculum changed before the next semester opened. New cadets studied observation before competition. They learned that composure could influence an encounter long before physical skill ever mattered. One additional note appeared in the instructor handbook, approved without a single opposing vote. It read, "Never evaluate a civilization by appearances alone. The greatest advantage may be the one that does not seek attention." Years later, new students still asked why that rule occupied the first page of the manual. I always smiled before answering because I remembered the exact morning it had been written. It began with a quiet transfer student from Earth who looked completely ordinary. It ended with an academy discovering that humanity's greatest reputation had never come from overwhelming force. It came from the rare ability to remain calm, respectful, and unshaken when everyone else expected exactly the opposite. That was the day we stopped asking whether humans belonged among the stars. We began asking what the stars still had left to learn from humanity.